So what I wanted to get your perspective on now is because since you've kind of more or less been on both sides of the spectrum, I'm wondering, because there's some differences that I picked up that I want to point out, but I want to see from your perspective what they are for you on how you think, either you think you've improved or feel like you're still needing to improve on, where because you've done the questioning and now you're on the opposite spectrum where you're being questioned, how some things have changed along the way that more or less would have helped you conduct the interviews or the conversations, to more, I guess the best way I could describe is more natural as opposed to from where you first had started. Because I have noticed a big difference from the first episode all the way up to this point now. So curious to hear about your perspective on that.
Yeah, and you went deep in the archives to go all the way back there. I wish you would have gone so far, but because it's definitely hard, like thinking about your first episode versus thinking at like now I've done close to 200. Yeah. Like I honestly personally don't want to listen to that episode or see it at all. But something that there's like so many things I've learned in terms of like being the person who's interviewing someone else.
Right.
The only way you're going to get better at it or get more comfortable by it is by interviewing enough people. So like at the beginning, I wasn't comfortable with it at all because I hadn't interviewed enough people and I'm more of an introvert. So like that was one of my roadblocks at the beginning is like, I'm an introvert. Like, why am I going to do a podcast? Right. Which I feel like is a really common block for people. And so once I was able to do enough, I was able to be confident enough about like, okay, like I know like this personality type. I know like these types of people who are like relationship coaches. These are good questions to ask them. Or I know like these type of people who are content creators. Like I know I could go through this set of questions. So then once I was able to get to that point where I'm like, okay, based on like what type of person they are, I know what type of questions I could pull out of them. And I know what sort of questions they might not have never been asked before, which I feel like is important too. Because like if I just go and ask everyone the same questions, it's going to be like the same interview that they've done with everyone else. Right. But like when I'm able to catch someone off guard and they actually look at me and they're like, you know what? No one's ever asked me that. Yeah. And they like pause. Like that's a good moment for me because it tells me that I've done enough research on them that like they're not able to answer that question right away with like an automatic response that they've already given other people. And then in terms of the speaking side, honestly, I'm more comfortable in terms of interviewing other people versus speaking, just because I'm able to reflect it back more. I'm able to like ask different questions. I'm able to then make it more about them versus me. And I've just always loved it that way as an introvert. So I would say that. I would also say like, in terms of like reaching out to people, something I wish I would have known at the beginning is that more people will say yes than you think.
Right.
Because I thought everyone was going to say no. I thought like, oh, like this is like a new podcast. Like this is a lot to ask for someone's time.
With who you ask for, because here's the thing that I've noticed with you, because I've heard you say that before with some other conversations you've had, where when you said that, actually that's what made me go back further down the rabbit hole, if you will, where I was wondering, well, who did you ask? To more or less kind of get the ball rolling. And when I say this here, I hope it doesn't come off the wrong because that's not my intention. But I was looking at like who were you speaking with, and because the thing is because I'm sure you obviously relate to this, but when I first started, it was whoever I can get pretty much, and I'll ask anybody. And one of the things that I've noticed that I did for myself, and I think you brought this before in the past as well too, where the research was a big thing for me. Where it's like I got to see what they're all about before I get started with them, because the last thing I want to do is, as you said before, ask the same question. But when you started asking the guests to be on the show, and started getting more yes as opposed to no's as you were probably anticipating, did that give you a sense of confidence for you to continue on, or was it one of those things where you're starting to hear a lot of yeses, and then once you got to a point where the no's are starting to come in, and maybe the no's are becoming more so than the yeses, did that kind of mess with you a little bit about, okay, well, what's going on here for myself? Because I got accustomed to this. So is it one of those things where I just got comfortable with with those expectations, or was it a situation where you had to learn to reassess and figure out what was the realities to what your expectations were to be?
Yeah. So honestly, like I feel like this is the area I probably could push myself more in terms of like people who have more followers, people who have a bigger following.
Right.
Like I like to stay with people who have like comfortable followings for me. Like maybe they have
I see
like
what you're saying.
100,000, or maybe they have 200,000, or maybe they have a couple million on TikTok, but like they seem very personable and they seem very down to earth. And like I know I could get a good interview with them. But in terms of pushing myself, in terms of people with like bigger audiences or people who like I don't necessarily know if I can have a good conversation with, I don't push myself in that area. Like I'll go around like the people who I know are more likely to say yes. But at the beginning, what I did was like I would start with people with like lower followings who were more likely to say yes. And then from there, I go maybe like a slightly level up, and then like a slightly level up, and then a slightly level up. And then now I'm at the point where I'm pretty comfortable and I get yes quite a bit, but I still get no's. Like some of the people that are like too busy, and I'm always going to get no's, but I'm fine with. Another thing is I've been in sales since I was 19. So like the word no doesn't bug me at all. Like you could tell me no, 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 no. And I'm like, I'm accustomed to it. Like it's kind of like you saying yes to me. Like it doesn't have like that same sort of frequency of no. Which versus like for some people who aren't in sales, like the frequency of no is a lot for them. Where like it feels like, oh no, like someone told me no, like, oh, my podcast must suck, or oh, my business must suck. And then they go down the rabbit hole. But I feel like I got pretty lucky to be accustomed to this word no, that like now if someone were to tell me no for the podcast, like it's not that big of a deal to me.
What happens if you get? I'm not sure if you've actually experienced. I'm not, because I don't recall if you mentioned this before in the past. But if you had gotten to a point where you're getting a dry spell of no responses from anybody, where because I used to be really consistent about doing as many episodes as I can to kind of put it in the bag, so that way I still have enough left over for me to compensate for those dry spells. But if you ever got to a point where I'm just not getting anything at all, what do I do at that point? Like when you first came to that point, what was the first thought that came through your head? And then how did you learn about going about handling it initially? And then from there, how have you gotten better with that?
So I personally haven't really experienced a dry spell because I do the same thing. Like I batch record for like I have 2 or 3 months out, which I like it that way because I could edit all of it. I do all the editing myself. I do everything pretty much myself. So that helps me. So I'm not like worried about like how many people I'm going to get in, more like I have time to like find those people that I want to interview. So I've never personally experienced that, just by setting myself up that way as well.
Did you ever come to a point where you felt like not necessarily the interview process in itself, but the redundancy of like reaching out, the editing, and then having more or less figured out a formula that worked for you that maybe started to get a little bit tiring? That I'm not sure if you got to a point where you realize, I'm not getting the same feeling like it did before in the first whatever couple episodes or couple 10 episodes or whatever the case may be, that you were wondering not necessarily if you were still into it, but rather, what can I do to spice it up a little bit for myself? Because the thing I wanted to ask you about this here. So this is kind of a two-part question for this here, but because you mentioned before, you don't go back to listen to the previous episode, but that's interesting for me because if for anyone because I feel like you've gotten better with each ones I've come across so far, especially the videos that I have come across. But if you don't go back and visit it, I'm wondering, where do you feel that, okay, I know I've gotten better, apart from the fact you have to listen to the episode because you're editing it all yourself. So I'm sure you take a lot from that. But after you've been away for something for such a long period of time, and if you don't like to go back and revisit it, how do you know where you've gotten better from one point to the next? And then when you have a process where you're doing the same thing over and over again in that capacity, if you hit that rut where like I'm not getting anything else out of it now like I used to before. So in dealing with that and having to know when you've gotten better, because I think sometimes when you're doing the same thing over and over again, sometimes because I've experienced it for myself, and I'm wondering if you have as well too, where I don't think I'm getting any better because it feels more or less the same way. And I think that's something that I did not realize I would come across until I started doing it more consistently, where I realized that that redundant process became almost like a detriment because I got comfortable with that cycle, where I didn't realize that I had to change it up to make it more exciting and interesting for me. So, I mean, it's a elongated question, but I hope you understand what I'm referring to on that.
Yeah, I do. And that's interesting because it actually happened to me recently, of getting like kind of tired of doing the same process with the podcast. But also another thing that I look at too, right? With a lot of the podcasts, I feel like it's routine in terms of routine scheduling, routine going to the interviews, routine editing.
Right.
So like when I notice I'm kind of in that rut, that usually means like either I need a break of like a couple weeks because like I'm tired of the routine, or maybe like I burnt myself out by doing too many interviews. I like to batch record interviews too, like within the same amount of time. Or I need to interview a different type of person. Maybe I'm interviewing people who are too alike and like it's nothing new. And maybe I need to like spice it up with like the person I'm interviewing, someone who I might not have considered before.
Right.
That's another thing I do too. What else do I do? I also look at, in terms of like a way that I find people, I look through like hashtag and Instagram a lot in terms of reels, in terms of who's posting a lot. And I'll find people through there. So maybe I'll go through there when I'm like not really inspired and look at different people's content, maybe content I don't usually look at, and say like, oh, what's interesting about this person? Like, what would I ask this person? And try to kind of get out of doing the same thing, because it can feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again with podcasting. So I've definitely felt that. And then another thing I would say too, in terms of, in terms of like, I forgot, like your second question was, could you remind me what the second part of that was? Because I was thinking about that part.
Because like I was referring to how you started to feel that redundancy after a while. If you ever thought about going back, and because you said before you don't necessarily like to go back, but then if you think about, well, am I actually getting better if I'm feeling this way? Because that crossed my mind as well too. But I'm wondering if you felt the same way for yourself about, if I'm feeling this way, does that mean I suck at what I do, or I'm not improving on that in that area because clearly something's not registering for me? So that's kind of what I was leaning to see how if you've noticed that, because it's not something that I felt like was something that I was expecting to deal with. But when I came to that, I was like, this is something that I was realizing that it's like working out. When you do the same thing over and over, and your body just starts to reject it after a while. And that's kind of what more or less I was experiencing. But I was wondering if you've gone through that as well for yourself.
Yeah. So one thing that I actually do use is, my friend has been listening to my podcast for a long time. So I can ask her an honest opinion of like, do you think I've gotten better at interviewing people? Do you think I've got worse? And she'll actually like tell me her opinion all the time. And I honestly prefer that way of like asking a couple people who I know have been listening for a while their feedback, versus me going back and critiquing it, just because I'm like a very harsh critic of myself. Yeah. So I'd rather not go to like the first 10, because I know I'm just going to be like, oh, this part was wrong. This part was wrong. Like, why didn't you do this? So I rather like have a couple people who I know will be honest, like completely honest about what I did wrong and what I did right, and just lean on it that way. Just because like I rather not be like a harsh critic of myself and go backwards. So that's kind of the way I prefer.
Do you feel like when you listen to, okay, let me take a step back. So when you do an interview with somebody, and let's say you felt like the conversation didn't go as well as you anticipated, not because of the person, just certain things that may have occurred about how you felt like you could have handled a little bit better. And knowing that if you could have handled a little bit better, it could have made the conversation that much more interesting. And then when you look back at the episode and you're editing it, have you ever come to a point where you thought, I can't release this because this is not good at all? Not because of the guest, it's just I sucked at what I did, and therefore the conversation wasn't as engaged as I was hoping. It's not something that I would be happy to release to, because if I set the standard for myself about X, Y, and Z, therefore this would drop that another notch or two below than what I've normally done. So if you've ever come to that point, I'm wondering how you first learned to deal with that, and then moving forward, how have you gotten better with that?
Yeah, I feel like that's just part of podcasting, right? Because you can interview so many people, and like one person you're going to vibe so well with. Right. And then one person maybe you thought you were going to have a good conversation with, and then you realize, that person, maybe they're not good at storytelling. Maybe they just seem closed off in their energy, and you can't really get them to like answer more personal questions. And it kind of seems like you're hitting a wall with them, which I've experienced multiple times. Yeah. Or like something just unknown happens. Yeah, that sucks when you feel like you're hitting that wall. And like I feel like there's no real way of avoiding it. Like for one example, I actually interviewed this one girl. She had like no shit show moments, like nothing in her life went wrong. Everything went perfect. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but like this just isn't my podcast where everything goes perfect. And, you go to an Ivy League school and everything kind of happens that way. Mm-hmm. Like you have to have at least one thing that happened that, was part of your experience of your 20s that wasn't that great. Like getting laid off, like breakup, like some massive like wake up moment.
Right.
And she just didn't have any. And I was like just looking at her like surprised. Like I've never met anyone who didn't have anything happen like bad in
Did
terms of
you
like
do your research
growth.
beforehand though to
I
make that
did research
determination?
beforehand.
Okay.
Yeah, but I didn't see anything in terms of like anything bad happen. I just saw like all her accomplishments.
Oh, I see
But
what
like
you're
I
saying. Okay.
assumed like someone would have, something on the way to their accomplishments, some
I see.
sort of hurdle, setback. So yeah, with those, like I've honestly just learned like, okay, like I'm gonna have like people who I do go well with. I'm gonna have people who I don't. But I rather focus on who's gonna go well with me versus the people who aren't. And if like I don't have to release every episode, like part of my Calendly is like if I don't find value in this episode, I'm not going to release it. Like it's something along the lines of that. And the reason why I leave that is because like that happens, it's kind of rare at this point, but it still may happen. So I still like to give myself the permission, like if it's just not a good interview, it's not going to get released. But it is hard to deal with at the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. So have you, because you talked about before where you are looking for more or less, in this case, like new challenges, people that you wouldn't consider talking to that would probably spark up a really good conversation. But when you think about that, and I thought about this before as well too. Actually, I'll say that Brimstone had brought people to my attention that I just did not consider talking to. Nothing against them in general. It's just that their field of expertise, if you will, it just didn't. It was something that I thought of ever considering checking out. Like I've talked to Shannon Collins, who is a medium, a spiritual investigator, paranormal investigator. Excuse me. It was never something I considered doing. So, if someone brings it to my attention and say, this is worth your while, sure, I'll listen. And I did. I'm glad I did. But for yourself, though, because I'm not sure if you get people that will say you should talk to or look into, said person, whatever. But I'm not sure if you ever consider like taking it to the point where you might want to talk to somebody that may not see eye to eye with you, but the hurdles they've gone through definitely does bring a valid point to bring out about what accomplishments they've experienced, whether you agree with them or not, but you're focusing on those said hurdles and then maybe come to an understanding about why they chose the path they did. So that way, because I would think in some cases, obviously depending on the people there, that would spark up a really good conversation and how they could come to understand each other's paths, if you will. So have you ever considered looking into something that may be really out of left field that may more or less challenge to the point where you may feel uncomfortable doing it, but that the content would be good enough to, to pursue and discuss with that person whatever these achievements are that they've gone through to be able to get to where they are with their lives?
Yeah. So I feel like out of all the people I've interviewed, they all kind of make sense on paper. Like if you look at their bio, if you look at their information, a lot of them do make sense. In terms of someone so out of left field, it would have to depend on like another big thing for me is they have to have content out there of them speaking just to the camera, like just like a selfie video, like different content. So just like I could get a feel of who they are as a person, how they talk, like their energy. That's really big. So if I found enough things in terms of like in their Instagram, in terms of like in their story, that would make sense, I would consider it. But yeah, if they didn't have enough content where I could kind of tell like whether they would be a good fit or not, I would probably pass just because like I feel like that's a good audit that I do before is just like, okay, like I could really tell with this person that they do have a good story or this person, like maybe they don't have their story fully together and like I shouldn't interview them yet because it just doesn't seem like it would be of value in terms of a podcast interview. So
what about so when you talk to somebody on your show, because you've said it before too, where you picked up on some people that, maybe didn't, you had anticipations and how things would turn out and didn't go out the way that you had hoped for. But when you start to talk to somebody and you come to that realization, there's a part of you think we got to cut this short or let's linger on a little longer. Maybe something will progress along the way, change a little bit because I'm not going to point out which ones, at least here on camera, while we're recording, but there were a few that I picked up where I was like, yeah, I could see the vibe change a little bit where certain conversations where it went one direction, then a question or a response kind of more or less changed the momentum where, like you can kind of tell, are they really claiming who they claim to be? Are they saying who they say they are? But not saying that they're bad people for for that change of momentum. But it's one of those things where I don't know if you experience that, if you have a change of heart where you realize I'm just going to cut it off right now and then cut the conversation short, or like I said before, carry a little longer. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and see how it turns out, because I know it's a case by case scenario, but I'm not sure how often it occurs with you because you've had well over 200 episodes at this point, but I'm sure you've had quite a few. And when you had that first one and then have those several ones after the fact, what has changed for you along the way about how to handle that moving forward from there?
Yeah, I still carry on the conversation and see where it goes. Usually I'll give it like max an hour or like 40 minutes, but I don't like to cut someone off like too early because I still want to see if like there's something that we can get to in the conversation. So I also try to be aware of like what kind of topics or maybe they turned off by. I don't know. I try to be aware of like their energy too, because like you could bring up certain topics and maybe like they're more talkative, maybe they seem more interested, maybe they seem like that's more them, versus some topics you could kind of feel like they're closing up in their energy and you could kind of feel like they're withdrawing from the conversation. So I also try to like be aware of that too. But like out of like the whole 200 that I've done, I feel like it's very low compared to what I thought it would be in terms of those conversations. Like it's kind of like a 1 out of like 20 or something. Like it's not that often, but yeah, I think I've been fortunate that like a lot of people in this space, I feel like are willing to tell their story. They've told their story before. I feel like there's a lot of similarities. But like it's just part of like podcasting. I feel like it's just getting over like those ones that don't go so well.
So here's a question that I wanted to ask you about, because there's one thing that I've heard you say pretty consistently, which is that you've talked about what more or less kind of started this here for you with the show, and in the various people that you talk with as well, having them go through their experiences in their 20s and whatnot. But I'm not sure what your stance on this here, but I wonder, because of the things you've gone through in your life, where you've had some pitfalls and then you've been able to rebound from that, some that are more difficult than others, I'm sure. But are you the type of person that really believes that things happen for a reason, or do you believe that things happen, but there's no rhyme or reason for that? And the reason I'm asking is because I happened to ask this to somebody else recently, and I come from a position where I don't believe things happen for a reason, because it's too much of a convoluted mess for things to go wrong. And then out of this billions of people in this world, for every person that says, I believe things happen for a reason, I come from the perspective of like, they say that because things are going well for them right now. And then when I ask somebody, like I happened to ask recently a while back with a guest head on my show, who had gone through some hardships and things were going really well for them, but not without a lot of hurdles on the way. But I had asked her, if this was all taken away from you now, what would you do then? Because things are going really good for you right now, and things are really good for you. But if it's all taken away from you at the end of the day, how would you respond to that? Because I think that, again, if things are going very well, of course, I believe people will say that. But I always wonder, if someone says that things happen for a reason, do they really mean that because things are going well, or because they believe that despite these hurdles, I will learn to overcome that for a good reason, whatever those reasons may be. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on that, considering what you have gone through and the various stories you've heard along the way that may have leaned you more towards that perspective.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you bring up a good point, because it's always hard, like when you're in like whatever it is that's happening, to say everything's happening for a reason. But then once you hit the peak, then you're like, oh yeah, of course this happened for a reason, because then X, Y, and Z happened. So I feel like they're both simultaneously true in different places that we're at. Like, for example, like recently I went through a layoff. I got laid off from this company I really loved, and it was really hard for me. And the last like 6 weeks of being unemployed have been really hard for me, like seeing the rejection emails, like going through all these final interviews, getting told no, kind of like looking at the job market, looking at layoffs and wondering like, am I going to get hired again? Like that was the actual belief in my head of like, what if I stay unemployed for a year or something? And I was really worried about that. That was a really big concern of mine. And but I actually got a job offer today. So now I'm going to start working on like April 10th, and I'm really excited about that. But if you would have asked me during when I was laid off that like, oh, everything's going to be fine, this is happening for a reason, like you're going to find a better job with a better income. Like I would have been like, no, like I wanted the same job I already had. Like I wanted nothing to happen to that job.
Right.
So I feel like it's all like subjective to like whatever stage you're in. Because like now I'm able to say like, okay, like this makes sense because this role has like all of my job experience into one. Like I could say it makes sense now. And like I'm
Right.
grateful for all of it now. But like it's always hard when you're in that period to actually admit that like it could get better or like, is it going to get better? I feel like you're just stuck in that spiral of thoughts when it's happening to you.
Do you ever feel like when you start, because I'm assuming that when you started doing this, it obviously a lot of perspective has changed for you about how you look at yourself along the way, and I'm sure you've said before that through various conversations you've had that you've learned a lot about yourself and life in general, just a lot of things that helped you basically form the person you are up to this point. But I'm wondering if you've ever had a point between the time you started with the show up to this very moment where you've thought that it's irrelevant, and if you start with thinking that way where it's not going anywhere for you for whatever those reasons may be, the space in itself, personal life, anything of that sort that has caused you to feel that way. I'm not sure how you learn to deal with that at first, because I think with a lot of people that I've come across that have dealt with downfalls, sometimes it's exaggerated where you hear stories of people say I was the lowest of my lows, but the lowest of the lows is like they just didn't work for a week because they got fired because of of their irresponsibility. But then you come to find out what the reasons are for that and how they led to them to go through that point. So you have a lot of layers behind all that, but you have to take the time to learn about that. But when you start going through that for yourself and, being more or less the inspiration for why you started this show in the first place, I'm sure you've had some parts of yourself where you've come to that point again where you realize what is the point of all this, because it still hasn't changed for me personally. I'm still going through the same struggles to some degree. And even though I've learned a lot, but something hasn't changed. And I feel like there's still something that I haven't learned to grow properly that is still holding me back. And that self-reflection, I think, is one of the hardest things that I've learned to, as of recently, funnily enough, that was very difficult for me to truly understand, but it took a long time for me to get to that point. But I'm wondering for yourself now, making that discovery along the way for the purpose of the show, how you still learn to deal with that for yourself up to this point.
Mm-hmm. How I learned to deal with every setback as they come up.
Well, because each setback is different, but I'm sure there are some that are harder than others where it gets to the point where you realize why bother do what I'm doing with this here, because I don't feel like I'm getting any better with that. And it might be just for a short period of time, but I'm wondering, I guess the question I was trying to ask, I'm sorry for making it elongated, but is that if you come to that point where you've hit that roadblock more or less, and you realize that I've gone so far to this point, but the previous issues that led you to going now this path of you doing the show and then finding jobs that you have loved, and then you said you were laid off, and having that struggle and having to overcome, like, am I going to get another job? Because if I'm not going to work for another year, what am I going to be doing to this point? And if you got to that, when you got to that point, you thought about the show. What's the purpose of me doing the show for the reasons why I did in the first place when I'm still going through the struggle right now? How am I learning to deal with this here? Am I going to be able to relate this into the show to be able to use this as a positive momentum for me to use this as a way to figure out how to do this and made this part of the narrative for how the show can still carry on, because this is part of the shit show of my life up to this point. Because I'm wondering how you deal with that at that period and having to do the show along the way, where if you're interviewing people, you're not the best mood, you're concerned, you're very worried, and having learned to deal with that while you're still doing the show in the first place. And I'm wondering, like, if you think about how you deal with it in that interim, how have you learned to overcome that along the way? Apart from the fact you got a job where you feel that sense of relief, but in the middle of it when you were just completely unsure, how did you learn to deal with that? So I know it's a convoluted question, but there's a reason why I led to that here.
Yeah. Well, when I'm going through it, I feel like there's a couple different things I'm doing. Like, for example, with being unemployed the last time, I would say that was definitely harder than in times before, just because of like the increasing job market, like the increasing competition. But what I did during this time is I remind myself of the last time that I was unemployed and how that went. And I was like, okay, the last time that I was unemployed, this is what happened. Okay, the employee that I ended up working with came out of nowhere, gave me an offer within 3 days, like totally out of nowhere. And then I was really excited about it. And it ended up being a job that I loved. So I was like, okay, what can I take from that time? Okay, I don't necessarily have to know when exactly this job's going to appear, how it's going to appear, or like what application it's going to appear through. But I know like from what's happened in the past that it's going to happen. So what I did this time is I just referred myself to last time and what all the things I did last time. Like, okay, last time I was more active on LinkedIn. Last time I did all these different hacks to find a job. Last time I connected with all these hiring managers and I got interviews that way. So I feel like having like that pattern of whatever is happening to you that's like not so great of like what you did whenever that time was in the past. I feel like that's good. You can kind of use that as like a template. Okay, last time I was going through the struggle, these are the things I did that helped. And like these were all the things that didn't help. These were all the things that led me the wrong way. And that's kind of what I do whenever I go through like a shit show moment is I just think about my last ones and all the process I did then. And then in terms of like interviewing and continuing with the show during this time, it was funny because I actually had this girl talk about like manifestation and manifestation for you, like your dream job and like already visualizing the offer letter on your phone and just continuing to visualize that offer letter. And like, you don't have to worry about the how. And it was funny because I interviewed her right during this time. And that was like a week before I ended up getting this job. But it helped me a lot being able to ask different questions than I would have like at a different stage because I already had a job. So why do I have to ask people about like how to manifest your dream job or what to do when you're in like this specific setback? So I feel like it also brings new questions to your conversations. But also another thing too, like if you're not in a good headspace to record, like maybe you shouldn't be recording necessarily that day. Like if you're not feeling good, maybe you should just like change it to another day. Cause like on all the days I did record, even though I was unemployed, I never felt like completely down or completely like mad or completely disappointed. Like that would happen in other moments, but it was never like the day that I was going to record that would happen. So I feel like that's another thing too, because I feel like it could be kind of hard if like you haven't processed all your emotions and then you're trying to go on a recording and talk to someone and be happy and be energetic and ask about their life and be really interested in their life. And then like in your mind, you're like consumed by something else. I feel like that's not going to be easy versus like taking that time to actually decompress. Like, okay, what's these thoughts bringing up? Okay, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel scarce? Like, where does this remind me of? And like kind of going through the whole process that you need to go through to make yourself feel better and then hit record and record on another day, I feel like is more helpful for me.
Have you ever talked to somebody in your show that you may have had agreed with how they approach things and then look back at it later on? Maybe you've come across, maybe by chance you came across the video again and or someone brought up the episode, or you probably saw the person through social media, caught something that they had said and made you remember the conversation. You realize that I used to agree with this, but I don't anymore. And like that has occurred along the way that made you realize, what that would be. And I'm not asking you to tell me who the person is that you spoke with, but if you've ever come to that point, and let's say you book someone else that's more or less kind of the same, has the same thought process as well, too, same set of values, whatever the case may be, and you're about to speak with them in the upcoming future, does that change your perspective on like, well, I know before I approach it like this with that person, now that I realize that this is not the same for me anymore, I'm not going to ask the same question to this person anymore. So I'm curious about how you would go about in handling that, especially if you're going to be talking with somebody that's more along the same thought process, how they look at the previous guests that maybe you no longer agree with anymore, that make me realize that, can I still do this anymore? And if I can, what will I change this around to make it consistent with me rather than with the guest, if you will?
Yeah. So there's actually someone I interviewed and we had like a different stance on like credit and saving. Like this person believed that you shouldn't save at all and you should like just use purely credit and have no savings account. And I don't agree with that at all. I feel like you should have a savings account.
Right.
And with that, I didn't necessarily agree during the conversation. I just kind of changed the topic, which I feel like a lot of us do. Like if we don't like the answer or something, we just change the topic.
Is it because you're afraid of confrontation?
No, it's just because like I didn't feel like talking about it because I had such a different stance. And like, I'd rather ask him more things about his journey than go into like his stance about not having a savings account. Like, I'd rather go into something else versus going and asking that question and then going to a point where like I didn't agree with him more. Like, I'd rather not continue down that line. But like, I feel like with anyone you bring on, it's hard to agree with them 100%. You're never going to agree with them 100%. But I think the point is just to bring someone who has a different perspective than you. And some people who listen to your podcast are going to agree, and some people aren't going to agree. And I feel like that's just going to be part of it. But like with that question that I asked him, and like about like balancing your means, and like what if you like have a habit of overspending, I feel like a lot of people who are in that similar space wouldn't answer that way. So I feel like even if I were to ask it again, it'd probably go differently depending on like their point of view and their history with savings and like how they structure their business. So I feel like if I were to bring that up again, it would be different. But I think with that scenario, it's just like, okay, I have someone who has a completely different point of view than me, and that's okay.
Would you challenge them if you were to bring it up again in another conversation? If they were to, not whether it be the same person or not, but someone with similar views, would you? Because you said before you didn't want to go down that path of just keep questioning because you want to change the subject. But to me, that would sound like an interesting opportunity for you to start digging deeper and pull more out of them into because whether or not if your intention is to challenge them to tell them you disagree, but just to, or purely on the basis of like, I want to learn more where you come from, but I got to keep picking at it further because I understand it, but I got to see why you believe that. Because if you believe that, it's not going to be a 5-minute conversation to get to point A to point B. We got to go a lot deeper in this rabbit hole. So do you think you'd be willing to do that potentially with the possibility that if they say something that you flat out don't agree with and you tell them, well, I don't agree with that at all, I think that's a ridiculous answer, then that's where the conversation may shift. Either the person will be receptive, I get where you're coming from, but this is why I believe it. Or they may say, I don't give a shit. I think you're wrong either. I think you're wrong because if you don't do it like this, and then that's where the clashes come through. So I'm wondering like if you would ever consider doing that where you challenge it, but you just have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing to get some sort of response where, it could go one way or the other, but that's not the point. The point is you want to find the purpose of why you feel it's necessary for you to go down that path. I mean, I know it's long what I'm trying to point out here, but that's my perspective of why you may want to go down a path and may not go down that path.
I don't know. Me personally, I rather ask another question because I feel like that would take up a lot of time. So I'd rather spend that time asking additional questions about other areas I wanted to know about them versus going into that rabbit hole that we might just disagree on and just having that take up majority of the time. So that's the way I've always viewed it, is I'd rather just go the other way.
But don't you think that would make it for an interesting conversation to really start picking at those things where, because I guess I'm coming from a perspective like even let's say right now, if you had said something, or if I had said something, especially if I said something that you don't agree with, and if your perspective is let's just go over to this church, I'm not gonna confront the issue. I'm just gonna okay, I see what you're saying, but I don't agree with it. We're gonna go down this route. But if I say to you, no, let's keep talking about this, and if someone does that to you, say no, let's stick with this. This is an interesting conversation. If they present that to you and say, let's stick with this because this is important. You don't agree. I agree with this path here. We should find, not saying that, with you talking to them, there's going to be a solution to the problem. But I think what I'm really trying to get at is that you're getting to the heart of the issue of where you come to a much clearer understanding. If it comes to the point where you just don't come to understanding at all, then you've already gone far down the trenches it is already, that it made for a good conversation. Hopefully that when someone listens to it, they didn't agree at the end of the day, but the conversation was worth having because we come to an understanding where they were coming from, and we see both perspectives. And then that gives the audience more or less the opportunity to make a proper decision for themselves. I would hope that because those clash were presented and how they've learned to deal with that, I would think that would make for a better conversation for each of them for each of you, I should say, to walk away with like, okay, now I know how to conduct myself better because I've been through the battle, if you will. So, but again, I'm not saying that you should do this, but I'm wondering if you were to do that, do you think you would be capable of handling that in that capacity?
Honestly, I think it's not my style to do. in
Okay.
terms of going deeper and deeper into like an issue that like I find like a completely different perspective on. I don't think it would be my style to just keep going at it. Maybe if I had a different personality, I would do that. But me personally, I'm more like introverted. I'd rather go to like another topic that's safer. Like I'd rather kind of do that thing versus like I could see someone who's extroverted who likes to like go into different things. I could see
Right.
them doing it, but just my personality just isn't my personality to do that.
What would be something that for you that would get that out of you to? So I would think that, let's say for example, like what's something that you're into, like pop culture wise,
Like a TV show or music
anything in
or
general, just music,
anything.
movies, anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm into hiking. I'm into country music. I'm
Okay.
into like outdoorsy things.
Okay. So
Yeah.
let's talk country real quick. So I want to just kind of get your perspective on this. So who's your favorite country artist right now?
I like Morgan Wallen. I like Luke Combs. I like all the
Okay. Okay.
typical
So you like
country.
the newer
Yeah.
guys, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if someone comes up and says, "Oh, you like country music?" I don't like that. That country you listen to is not good. The real country, you're looking at George Strait. You got to listen to guys like or Dolly Parton, old stuff. You know, those are the guys. You know, the artist's name, the Judson sisters. You know, those are real artists, right? If someone comes up and says, "I don't like that," how could you like this? This is not real music. If they come in that capacity to discuss with you about that, they're just shooting the shit with you. Is that something you're willing to go down that rabbit hole? Say, no, 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 I love this because this music works for me. Can you have a conversation with that with something that you really are more or less passionate about, as opposed to, let's say, talking about credit saving or whatever else it may be? Would that be more along the lines you would be going down that rabbit where you would feel more comfortable talking, you know, in expressing your passion, if you will? That would that be more along the lines you would be leaning towards, as opposed to the other subject matters?
Yeah, and like that subject matter, I would be open to like listening to their music too, and then playing some of my music, and then going
Right.
back and forth. Or like even one that's funner than that is someone who doesn't like country at all, and then trying to convert that person. I feel like that's more fun
Okay.
versus someone who's already into country. But yeah, I love trying to convert people who are into country and seeing how that goes.
Do you like the old school country stuff though, or are you just more of the newer stuff?
I do like some of the old school.
Like for you,
Yeah.
what's a good one for you, like old school wise?
You know the song Fishing in the Dark?
I may
I don't
have
know
heard
how
that.
old that one is.
I don't
Yeah,
think
I
I have.
want to say that's like 1970s or something. But I really like that song Fishing in the Dark.
Who's singing that one?
I don't know. I just sing it all the
It's called Fishing
time.
in the Dark.
Yeah,
I'm gonna write this down. Fishing in the Dark. It's from the 1970s.
I think so.
Okay, I'll look for it here because I have my cousin's getting married to somebody, and he's a huge country fan, but he likes old school country, like old stuff, and that's where I lean more towards as well too. My wife is starting to like more country, but she likes some of the newer stuff. Luke Combs is an example, and I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's fine, but it's just not my cup of tea. But okay, so when it comes to your show, though, did you ever consider changing anything at all about the show that would take away from what it's known for now, where you talk with various guests about their ups and downs and how they've accomplished these set goals? Have you ever considered changing the show almost entirely to make it more, I wouldn't say appealing, but just more interesting for you, and with the intention of, well, I hope, maybe there's something else that I would rather focus on, that this has kind of, not saying run its course, but maybe it has for you, but let's just do something entirely different altogether, because I think that this would be more interesting for me to engage with, rather than asking people to come in and tell me their stories about how they overcome said struggles, if you will. So anything that has ever changed along the way, you would consider doing that, changing direction of the show altogether?
Yeah, I have thought about like changing the name. I have thought of like, should I start another one all from the beginning
Okay.
and just see how that goes? So I have thought about that, but like it's kind of hard with when you have a momentum with a certain show to want to go leave that behind and start a new one, because it's like, oh, I have to start all over again. But I have thought about it. But yeah, I kind of wanted to continue because like with the momentum, I was like, I don't really want to rebuild a new momentum with a new show and new like guests and new thought process. I kind of rather continue with this one and see where it goes. But yeah, I have considered it in the past.
But so you said about changing the name of the show. Well, what about just keeping the name and then just making it a show about where you can just talk about literally anything, where it doesn't have to be about how did you overcome these hurdles to become successful at this field that you're in. Like, you ever thought about just doing it just a complete 360 where the show is still the same, more or less, but it's going to be about whatever. So today I'm going to talk to so-and-so about this thing, but we're not probably going to talk about their field. We're probably going to be talking about some TV show we saw last night, and that would be the entirety of the episode because that's what we want to talk about today. Ever consider something doing like that in that capacity?
I haven't, just because I feel like also I'm so attracted to people's stories that it would be kind of hard for me not to ask them about those elements that I like to go into. So I feel like it'd be kind of hard for me to say, like, let's just go into your TV shows and stuff, because I'd want to go into something else because that's just what I'm the most drawn to.
What happens if you have a guest that tells you, hey, I've already talked about, what I do for the last 6 weeks because I had a bunch of interviews. Can we just talk about something else? Have you ever had anyone do that to you at all, where they said, I just don't want to talk about that?
Yeah, no one's done that to me yet.
Okay.
About they didn't want to talk about anything. So
what do you think you would do if they did that to you, or say, I don't want to talk about, my achievements. I just want to talk about something else entirely different. If they put you on the spot as you're recording, how do you think you would handle that?
Yeah, I would ask them, okay, what's okay to go into? And then go from there.
Say, let's talk about TV show.
Like, if they don't want to talk about like their work, their family, like if they're eliminating all the topics, it would be kind of hard.
Right.
But if like they say like, okay, here's like the topics like I'm okay going into, at least that will give me some idea of like, okay, these topics are like okay to go into. What's if
they say, let's talk about country music? Would you be okay with that?
It would be hard for me to make a long episode about country music just because, like, I don't remember any of the artists' names. Like, I just know all the song titles. Like, I know all the lyrics, but like,
what happens if they gave you the artist's name? That's the whole episode. What's the name of the song? Oh, I know this artist. This is so and so. If that was the whole episode, you think that would make for a good one?
I don't know if they gave me all the names, because like then I wouldn't be able to reference back the songs or like more.
No, they told
the
name of the artist.
Yeah.
If you know the names of the songs, but they know the artist as well, that's the whole episode, and you guys are just conversing about that. How did you first came across the song? Oh, I learned it when I was 5 years old, and I grew up with this song. My grandma played it. Like that's an episode in itself about the very songs that you had listened to. They listen to, but they know the artist where you only know the names. And then that could be the link to the conversation where it kind of goes off in different directions here. So again, I understand where you come from, and I completely understand, but believe me, I really do. But I'm just curious about the shift that would occur where you talked about how you want to try some other things, but not let this go because you've had the momentum building. But if it changes on the spot for you like that, where someone says, no, I don't want to talk about this, talk about this instead. I'm curious to see how you would handle that for yourself and how you would, because I get the impression, at least let me know if I'm wrong, that because you've had this momentum building up for such a long period of time, it's almost as if though this is the way this is the way that it is. So therefore I'm good with this. But if someone says, no, I want to do this instead, and let's say it's a guest that you really wanted to talk to, that I want to talk about their achievement, I want to talk about their life, and they say, I've talked enough about that, I want to talk about something else. That's something that I'd wonder how you would go about handling that, because if they're saying to you, I want to talk about country music, I heard that you like country music, but you don't know the artist. I know the artist. Let's talk about that. And I would think that would be an incentive for you to talk with them about that, where you are going to talk about their lives, but with the relations of the country music that you both like to listen to along the way, where they can teach you the name of the artist along as well too. So anything of that sort would just not appeal to you to try that path to see if that may work for you in that capacity?
No, like that would be interesting. Like talk about like the memory that you first heard of when you heard the song, or what does this like song remind you of? Going that route would be interesting. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see like if a guest were to tell me like, hey, I don't want to go into all these topics. Like I've never experienced that before. So that'd be interesting to see like, okay, if we can't go into all this, what are we going to go into?
Right.
And I'd be open to it. But yeah, it'd be an interesting experiment.
So for you, when someone reaches out, like when I reached out to you, and then you and the various other people that have come to want you to be on their show, do you have a vetting process for yourself about how you want you want to know what you're getting into? What have they done? What do they talk about? Things of that nature. Do you have anything for yourself that you do in preparation for being on someone else's show about what do they talk about on a consistent basis that would be intriguing for me to want to to partake in? So do you have a little bit of that for yourself to make that determination to come to the decision?
Yeah. So honestly, I don't have too much of that. I'll watch a couple videos on their Instagram, but more I look at going on other people's podcasts as like experience of like experiencing a different host, like experiencing someone new, like being able to experience more public speaking time. So I look at it more that way, as like I'm gonna treat this as like another experience. And like whether they have like a large listener base or not, like I'd rather have this experience with someone new versus like I'm going to put them through this vetting process. That's just kind of how I look at it.
You ever done a show where you have, let's say, come to a point where the conversation wasn't interesting for you, or you saw how they conduct certain things that help you change how you look at yourself, hosting wise, interview wise, whatever the case may be, that you realize that, okay, so now that I've had this experience, because I'm on the opposite spectrum, I know that I will not be doing X, Y, and Z for my show, because I used to do it. Now that I see it for myself in the opposite end, I know that that's not how I want to go about it, because they do it and it doesn't work for me anymore now. Or if you come to a conversation where you realize that this person is basically boring, I don't want to do this any much longer. So I'm wondering how you go about handling yourself in that perspective, where you come to the point where you're learning something about how you want to go about it, or you come to the point where you just don't care to continue on much longer, but you're going through the motions because obviously being polite, you want to be respectful of their time, but it's just not working for you at all because there's no connection at all whatsoever. So how do you learn to deal with that once you've had those experiences to parlay into your show?
Yeah, something that I noticed at the beginning when I first started going on other people's podcasts, and honestly, I haven't gone on that many other people's podcasts. Like it's probably been less than 10.
Yeah.
But some of those people actually didn't do any research at all. They kind of just winged the conversation, don't do any research. And I was kind of surprised by that. I was like, wait, how could you wing the whole thing, not do any research on them, not at least look at like a couple videos on their Instagram, like try to get a feel of them, like get their biography, like something to go off of.
Yeah.
So I experienced a couple of those people and I was very surprised by like experiencing that. I was like, I thought that was like foreign because like I like to do like a little bit of research, like as much as I can do before an interview. So that's something I would definitely never do. It's just kind of wing it, coming in, not knowing anything about that person. And then like trying to ask like relatively like the same like questions to them that like you would ask to every single guest. So like every single episode has the same set of questions and like nothing's changed from episode to episode. So I noticed that. And then another thing I noticed is just, I would say some people are better than other people in terms of like organization, in terms of like some people, like they'll say, okay, it's going to be this time. And then like at the last minute, they'll cancel, which I say it never looks good if someone's to cancel at the last minute. So I would say like when you're like going to record with someone, make sure that you're like fully committed to like showing up at that time or else it looks bad. So I've had that happen a couple times where I'm like, are you serious? And I've had that happen on both sides in terms of guests and in terms of me being interviewed by someone else. So it's like, either way, you don't want to do that because it's a bad look in terms of like not having time management. I feel like it's really disrespectful. And like me personally, I have a policy that if you don't tell me before and like it's not a good reason to cancel right like a minute before, I'm not going to reschedule because I can't trust that when we reschedule that you're actually going to show up the next time. If you couldn't give me advance notice, like at least a couple hours before, that you couldn't do it anymore. So that's one of my things too.
How do you go about handling critiques now, since you've been doing this for yourself, where you talked before about how you ask a really good friend that listens to your show that you ask for their opinion, they're going to give you an honest answer. And that's actually quite interesting for me because I'm not sure if the critiques vary as far as like, you know, what it is about their point of view that you trust that they're going to give you a good, honest perspective that will really help you become better at being a host or the questions you ask, or whatever the case may be. Because if you're getting it from one person's perspective who's going to give you an honest answer, tell you that it's good or it's bad or whatever the case, and then you hear other critiques that, because you've talked before about on your show, you know, let me know what you guys think. It will help out a lot if you put a rating or a comment on the iTunes or whatever else. It would help out a great deal. But if you start reading those critiques, so I personally haven't read them, but I'm curious about the ones you have read, if the critiques were rather valid or if they were just talking out of their ass, or if there's one of those things where it just doesn't make any sense, but because it doesn't make any sense, it actually has a negative effect on you. So you don't even know where they're coming from, other than the fact that I think they like it or I think they don't like it. So I'm curious about how, with the 200 episodes you've done up to this point, and more, so you're coming along the way, how has that changed for you about the critiques that come along the way from the beginning to where you are with it now?
Yeah. So I'm actually lucky. I haven't really got any bad podcast reviews yet, because that's
Okay.
like, I don't have that many, but like, I'm sure, of course, I'll get a bad podcast review in the future. But like, even with like looking at like other people's like podcasts who have like, like millions of downloads and like thousands of podcast reviews, right? Like when
Right.
I listen to other people's podcasts, I look at their podcast reviews, and like they'll get negative ones too. And like I think they're a really good podcaster. So I think it's another thing that's subjective. Like some people are gonna like you and some people aren't gonna like you.
Right.
And you just gonna have to find more people who like you than don't like you. But like even some of them that I look at, I'm surprised, because like I'll think they did a really good job, and like this person's just like kind of having a bad day, and like they just decided to leave a bad review. So with all of them, I feel like you kind of have to take it lightly, even if it's good, kind of just take it lightly, and then just improve in the areas that you think you should, and with like people who you really trust, because I feel like it could go one way or the other. And like depending too heavily on like other people's validation, I feel like can also end up badly.
Have you ever heard a critique that really changed your perspective on how you conduct yourself in the show, where that you took to heart and that you actually implemented as part of the process of how you want to go and manage the show, if you will? Anything that comes to mind that really had that effect on you?
This is gonna sound ridiculous, but I honestly didn't learn how to like level out audio, make it similar until like recently, unfortunately. So I had no idea like about like the whole auto leveling thing. And the
Okay.
reason why I didn't learn is because like it's something I didn't think to Google about, like why is one like louder than the other.
Yeah.
And so like my boyfriend pointed it out to me. He's like, one's way louder than the other. I'm like, what do you mean? I thought they were the same. Like, because
Yeah.
you listen to so many audio and like you just don't realize like how off it is,
Yeah.
because you were just like running through the motions trying to get it edited as like soon as possible. And after that, I was like, okay, like I'm actually going to go take some time to learn what I'm supposed to do with this, because he told me. So that must mean it's pretty bad. But like my boyfriend's another person too. He's like straight up with me.
Right.
So like he's another person I can ask, and he'll like give me like the real truth, like no filter whatsoever, like whether I like it or not. So
Who's somebody that you looked at as more or less something you try to not necessarily copy but emulate? That, okay, I like how they go about doing their show podcast, that more or less was in line with how you like to go about things for yourself. Like who was that one person or show or group of people that more or less would have helped you become the host that you are now?
one of the podcasts I love a lot is Lewis House, School of Greatness.
Oh, that's
I
right.
really
I've
love
heard you
the
say
way
this
he
before.
asks questions.
Okay.
And honestly, like when I'm like feeling like maybe burnt out or something, I just listen to someone else's podcast just to try to learn from like, how do they ask questions? What do they like to go into? How do they like to phrase things? Do they like to add like an ending question that they always use? Like I try to learn from that. So I like his a lot. I like Lori Harder, Earn Your Happy. I like Angie Lee. I like ET a lot. I would say those are my favorite. But yeah, I like, try to get some inspiration from them as well, in terms of like also like the people they interview too, like what personality types.
Who's the least person that you did not expect to get either inspiration from or had learned a lot from, that would help, formulate the way you go about in conducting the show, or how you would go manage certain things with regards to the question, whatever the case may be, that you did not expect to get some sort of lessons or inspiration from?
I feel like I get inspiration from like during like the different jobs that I've had, we've had different scripts in terms of going into different emotions and stuff. So I feel like I have gotten some inspiration from that, about like going into different things, going into different triggers, going to different things that I might not usually go into. So I feel like that helped a lot too. Yeah, I would say that too. I also like to go personal development events a lot too. So I feel like that has played into it.
Do you feel like I'm wondering if you think anything has changed for you about how you go about, and because like I said, I've listened to some of the very early stuff you've done before and how things have done, how I've gone with it now. But I'm wondering if you feel like if how conversations are handled, in let's say in this capacity, because I know sometimes I always get the impression that there are some people who host that, and I've done this as well too. So I'm not saying that I've never done this because I know better. It's not the case at all. But I've seen with a lot of shows where there's a formula that used to work, way back in the day, where like in this, I'm gonna use like a night show as an example, where hey, so tell me about this movie. Oh, it's great. Like that's that kind of formula. It's not something that I'm attracted to anymore. But I noticed that there are some people that still have that same formula where they are implementing with their show, where you talked before about someone who's winging it, that they ask the same questions over and over again. Like, well, these are things I've answered before. And you said it as well too, where you try to avoid asking the same questions and want to find something that's interesting for them to engage with you on. But I'm wondering if you feel like because you've gone through this experience that maybe you didn't think of it before, but you notice it now, that there's a formula that needs to change. I believe it needs to change, where you don't have to go through the same pattern over and over and over again, which I think a lot of podcasts, I'm surprised, not to insult them by any means, that have gotten some guests. I'm like, I can't even get that guest. Not to say that I'm better than them, but I can't get this guest. How are you able to get this guest? And you got this guest, you ask the most boring questions, and yet you were able to get them for over an hour, and the conversation was not meaningful at all. It was very boring. Not to sound judgmental, but that's the perception that I got. So I'm wondering for yourself how you may have changed your point of view about how things could be better, or how you felt like you could do better for yourself to not go down more or less that same path, if you will.
Yeah. Well, like the first question I always ask, and the last question I always ask, and then all the other questions I usually vary them. But that is something I could do. I could change like the first question or change the last question and make it only one question I ask every time. But that's something I honestly haven't thought about until now. But yeah, that is something I could do in terms of changing that up. But it's just so easy to get into that routine of like asking
Right.
this and asking that. So I'd have to change my routine of wanting to ask that and figure out what else I would ask instead.
But why do you think you need to change? Why would you think about now changing it? Because is it because you think that it's not interesting, or it is becoming repetitive, or you maybe realize that's the case here, or is it a thing where because it's you're busy with your day and this is easy to do, is I can just do this and that, and then the questions would hopefully generate some answer for the guest to say something interesting, and then I can just go on with the next beat. And I don't mean to digress here, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because I've come to a point where I realize that with the amount of research that I do, and I used to write the questions down. And I remember one interview, I didn't even bother looking at the notepad, that I had all these questions written down, all the research I've done, because the conversation went one direction and went another direction, to the point where I didn't need the notepad anymore because I remembered it for the most part. But it's one of those things where I'm starting to notice a lot for myself, where that's why I don't do an intro for the show. I've said it before too, where if I bring a guest on the show, hey everybody, this is Rob Medina, and I have Sophia Lorena on the show. Hey, how are you doing today? Like something about that seems a little curated, and then all of a sudden, if we go, so tell me about the worst day of your life. What was it like? It doesn't seem consistent. It doesn't seem like it fits. And I've seen that happen a lot with a lot of shows. And I remember distinctly thinking, I'm not going to do that. Let's just start the conversation, and then let's make that organic. That works for me, but I see other people who have a format that works well for them, that it works well for them because they found the system that works, and it fits perfectly for them. But I still feel like there's some people who are still finding that rhythm where I can see the potential, but they haven't found that potential just yet. I'm not saying that's the case with you, but I'm wondering if you felt that way about yourself before, where you've realized that from what you just said just before, if you have come to the point where I've got to change something drastically because it's starting to sound like the other guys that I just listened to, where I had no connection with at all, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just a thought that came up today during this conversation of like, should I change it up more? Just thinking about some of the other interviews that I've done. been on their podcast. But other than that, it didn't really come up. But I don't know. It's something to go back and forth of because it's like easy to ask those questions. And like I like having that starting point of being able to see that moment for them and then go into more from there. But I don't know. It could be good to change it up. It could not be good to change it up. I'm kind of still debating whether I want to or not. But
it's a risk worth taking, I think, because I mean, you'll figure it out for yourself eventually, of course. But I think it's worth taking because I like to find individuality with each show that when I listen to them, like this is Mark Maron, this is Joe Rogan, this is Louis Lowe's, all like you can tell as soon as you listen to who these guys are, Howard Stern, and so on and so forth, because there's an identity that they've not what does they create for themselves, but it's them speaking to the point where anyone else that tries to emulate that, you're just copying them, and that's the part that I think a lot of people have tried to do before in the past, where I'm guilty of as well too, that I think where they see the formula that works and they just try to copy that rather than figuring out for themselves, but what works for me at the end of the day, which is why I find your show very interesting too, because when I had listened to the episodes, it's more or less figuring out what have you done to figure out who you are, and then what are the lessons you've come out of it to be able to share with other people on the way to hopefully, change your life in some capacity here. But I'm sure without a doubt you've talked before that how a lot of that has worked for you as well, where people that you did not expect to change your perception had drastically changed your perception in a lot of ways. I was looking for this conversation with you, and I've actually was holding off for a while because I wanted to listen to your show and listen to the various interviews you've done as well too, to get more or less a feeling for how things have started for you before and how you are with it now. And then seeing some episodes you've done on other shows that I was able to come across, and believe it, they were kind of hard to find, believe it or not. But when I did find them, it's interesting because I noticed how you handled yourself on the show that you're on, and then how you handle your show. And then I try to find the pieces so where have things progressed along the way, or where have things improved along the way? And you can tell, at least for me personally, well, okay, I can see that she doesn't do this anymore. She's able to go more in this direction now. But it's interesting for me though, that the intention of the show was because of a hardship you've dealt with at a very early age that most people would not consider to being that would think, well, that's just standard. That's everyone goes through that in their lives. But it became something more, which I found very fascinating when you started with the show, which is why I really was interested in speaking with you, because I was curious about what it was that would have changed your perspective on the way from when you first started to where you are with it now, how you look at yourself and so on. So I guess the final question I could ask you is that if you feel like you are much happier with yourself now up to this point because of the experience you've gone through, of the guests you've had on the show, because I'm sure a lot has changed for you because of this show that you had started because of an experience in your life that led you to making this show. And if it has changed for the better, how do you feel like you would handle yourself better now in the next real major hurdle? Because you talked about losing your job, where you've realized you've gone back to make the comparison about how you handled that before to handle this much better now. And it didn't deter you from wanting to do the show anymore because you were able to find, what's the word I use? Some sort of comfort that you can focus your time on something else to be able to alleviate the stress that you have with dealing with other things that this show could release you from. So clearly this has helped out in some capacity, but I'm wondering if you feel like that, if it's changed you feel like for the better as a result of what you've gone through and because of what the show has brought for you along the way.
I think it has changed me for the better, because I feel like whenever I'm going through something in like different areas and like relationships, or in different areas with friendships, or like job loss, like I'm able to ask the people who I bring on the show, versus in the past I didn't have that. So I didn't have like these people that I can ask these really specific questions based off of what I was going through, which I found really helpful, because also hearing their experience reminds me like, okay, this happens often. Like it's not something just happening to me. And then usually I could gain something from their insight and something that they did that helps me a lot. I would say also, like, if I'm going through different things, being able to realize that like these moments are like temporary too, and being able to reflect back on that and have my template of things that happened in the past, and then also be able to pull a template from all the people I've interviewed helps me a lot. And then Yeah. So I think overall it's helped me for the better in terms of breaking out my shell, reaching out to people who I wouldn't be comfortable reaching out to in the past,
Right.
being able to have conversations with like so many different personality types that like I've never had conversations with it in the past. So I feel like it's helped me grow as like an individual and then also helped me grow in my career. And then I feel like it's also helped me grow just like in my relationships. And I think overall it's been pretty good.
Do you think that if you ever come to the point where you would consider entering the show, that when you do so, it'll be at a point where you could tell yourself that I don't need this platform anymore to do this because, you know, I've come to the point where I don't have to do this anymore, where I'm comfortable with, you know, finding something else to fulfill that void, if you will. Do you think you ever come to that point where the show may not be necessary for you to do that anymore?
I don't know, because I feel like at the same time too, it's hard looking at something that you put so much time and energy into and
Right.
say like, okay, I want to end that thing. Because it's like I probably put like at least like thousands of hours into the show at
Yeah.
this point that I couldn't see myself like ending it completely and not putting any more time or energy into it. I feel like that's kind of like hard for me to let go of like I put all this energy into this thing and now I'm just gonna shut it down completely. It could change in terms of intervals, in terms of like I want to release one episode X amount of weeks and maybe turn it down the frequency of episodes or something, or turn down the amount of content I create. I could see it change in that way, but I couldn't see it change in the way of like, I'm ready to end this completely.
Interesting. Okay. Well, so for the camera, I'm going to say thank you very much for giving me your time, but because it's interesting that when you first had when I was messaging you, you were telling me before that you were waiting for an interview, and then you shared that you were laid off, and then you happen to get a job all around the same time, which I'm really happy for you. I really am, and congratulations for the new job you're going to be starting next month. But it's also interesting too that despite the hurdles you go through, you seem to have a pretty even keel about yourself that really I think has helped me enjoy the show because um I think I've gathered a sense of maturity from you that I think that's what really got me invested with the show, because how you conduct yourself, I think really made me appreciate your approach and your perspective on things as well too. So if anything, you've got a fan in me, and I really mean that. But
Thank you.
I want to say thank you for giving me the time, because that really, I was hoping to delve a little bit further that in some areas that I wanted to hear more about with you when people were speaking with you, that I'm hoping that I can pull out here from you in this conversation. So for you to do that here for me now, I appreciate that. And I would love, really honestly, have you back on again to go a little bit more further down that rabbit hole, if you will, to see what else we can bring up along as well too. But I'll be sure to have the information down below in the links for people to check out for where they can follow you. So all that'll be sorted out as well too. But I guess by the time this episode gets uploaded and be in the coming weeks here, is there anything in particular that you would like to announce now that you would be able to share with anybody that people can look out for, that they can be anticipating in looking out for your show?
No, I would say like the best way is just on my Instagram to keep in touch with me and on Apple Podcasts, but there's nothing necessarily in the next couple weeks that I'll be pushing out.
Okay. Well, until then, I want to say thank you so much for your time. And then for the cameras, I want to say thank you and cheers to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.